My name is Zenoria Wallace, and for nearly 60 years, I have carried my life quietly, like a folded piece of fabric tucked safely in a drawer. I stitched clothes, raised my son alone, paid my bills on time, and minded my own business. I was never the loud one, never the dramatic one, never the woman who drew attention. But on the night of my son's wedding, silence finally betrayed me. The ballroom was glowing with soft golden lights, and the guests were buzzing with laughter. Everyone looked perfect, as though sorrow had never touched their lives. I remember thinking how proud I was of my son, Orlan, standing there in his tailored suit, smiling nervously as he greeted guests. I didn't know that smile wasn't meant for me anymore. At the center table sat his new mother-in-law, Serafina Voss, a woman whose eyes were colder than her jewelry. From the day she met me, she treated me as though poverty were a stain she didn't want to touch. I ignored it. I had survived worse things than a rude woman with expensive perfume. But I didn't expect the violence. As servers placed steaming dishes across the table, Serafina reached forward, lifted a bowl filled with boiling broth, and without blinking, threw it into my face. The liquid struck like fire. My skin screamed. My breath vanished. For a moment, my vision blurred and the entire hall turned into a smear of light and shadows. Gasps echoed. A few guests stood, but none came close to me. And Serafina, she didn't flinch. She simply leaned back and said, with the calmness of someone commenting on the weather, "That's exactly what you deserved." I had heard insults before. But this was different. It wasn't just humiliation. It was a declaration. I touched my burning cheek, my fingers trembling. Before I could speak, my son stepped forward. My son, the child I raised on prayers and secondhand clothes. He crossed his arms and said, "She's right, Mama." That moment didn't break me. It hollowed me. I wiped my face slowly with a napkin, refusing to let the tears fall there, in front of wolves waiting to feast. I didn't shout, didn't create a scene. I simply stood tall, lifted my small clutch, and walked toward the exit with whatever dignity I had left. But just before leaving the hall, I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and dialed a number I had saved for months. The person answered on the first ring. "It's time," I whispered. And I walked into the night, burning but awake. If you think this night was painful, wait until you learn why. I had a secret plan prepared long before the wedding even began. When I drove home that night with my cheek burning and my heart trembling, I knew that moment at the wedding wasn't born in a single evening. Wounds like that don't appear suddenly. They grow silently, fed by months of small changes, subtle distances, and whispered manipulations. The truth is, the cracks between me and Orlan began long before the soup touched my skin. It started the day he brought Alara to meet me. She was polite, soft-spoken, and dressed like someone who never forgot to iron her clothes. Her smile was warm, but something behind it felt rehearsed. I brushed the thought aside, thinking I was simply being protective of my only child. But mothers feel shifts long before anyone else does. At that first dinner, I had made Orlan's childhood favorite, lemon pepper roast chicken. The smell filled the house with memories. When I served the plate, Orlan smiled faintly, the way he used to. But Alara placed her hand on his arm and said, "Oh, he doesn't eat heavy food anymore. I've helped him switch to cleaner meals." Her tone was sweet, but the comment sliced through the room. And Orlan, my boy who once devoured that dish after school, pushed his plate away without a word. A small moment, small enough to pretend it meant nothing. But small moments reveal big truths. Days passed, and I noticed a new pattern. Orlan's calls became shorter. His visits became rare. When he did come by, he stayed only a few minutes, as if someone was clocking his time. One afternoon, as he stood near the door holding his car keys, he said, "Alara thinks I need space to grow. Mama, she says I've been too blended with you." Blended? I raised him alone. Of course our lives were intertwined, but I didn't argue. I simply nodded, even though the words stung deeper than he realized. Then came the moment that should have warned me. I walked into his apartment one day with homemade soup because he had been sick. Alara opened the door and blocked the entrance with her body. She smiled, but her eyes were ice. "You don't need to do this, Mrs. Wallace. Orlan has me now. I take care of him." The way she said "me" was not reassurance. It was a declaration of ownership. I stood there holding the soup, realizing something was happening to my son. Slowly, methodically, quietly. I felt him slipping inch by inch, and no matter how loud my heart screamed, I couldn't pull him back. And yet I didn't know then. The worst was still waiting, because the next thing I discovered didn't just hurt me. It proved that someone had been turning my own son against me long before the wedding ever happened. The week after Alara blocked me at their apartment door, I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. Mothers worry even when nothing is wrong. That's what I told myself as I folded laundry, watered my plants, and kept my phone nearby waiting for a call that never came. But truth doesn't hide forever. Sometimes it slips out when people forget to cover their tracks. It happened on a rainy Thursday evening. My old laptop, slow as it was, pinged with a notification. Orlin had accidentally synced his messages to my email years ago and never removed the connection. I never checked them. It felt like an invasion of privacy. But that night, another ping came. Then another. Then another. Curiosity pulled me in ways I couldn't resist. When I opened the inbox, I froze. There were messages between Orlin and Serafina, Ilara's mother. Conversations I was never supposed to see. They weren't recent. They stretched back months, long before the engagement, long before the distance started growing. And the tone, it was unsettling. One message from Serafina read, "You need to understand the influence she has over you. She keeps you small, babying you. A man your age shouldn't cling to his mother like that." Another said, "If you want a future with Ilara, you must learn to prioritize your real family now." Real family? Had I carried him for 9 months, only to be erased by strangers with expensive handbags and cold eyes? But the message that shattered me was the one where Orlin replied, "I know, I'm trying. She just doesn't understand that things are different now." She. As if I were a burden, not his mother. I stared at the screen. My breath caught in my chest. My hands trembled, but not because of anger. It was grief, the kind that wraps around the heart like a fist and squeezes. Someone had been whispering into my son's ear, quietly, consistently, deliberately. Someone had been repainting me as a villain in his life, and he believed it. A storm raged outside my window, rain slamming against the glass like desperate knocks. I closed the laptop slowly, feeling the weight of a truth I had ignored for too long. My son hadn't drifted away. He had been pulled by voices determined to sever the bond we had built through years of struggle, sacrifice, and love. I sat on the edge of my bed, letting the darkness settle around me. For the first time, I realized I was not just losing my son, I was being replaced. Piece by piece, word by word, lie by lie. But even then, I didn't know the full picture. Something far worse was waiting, something that would shake the ground beneath my feet. Because the next thing I uncovered didn't just explain the betrayal. It proved that someone had been planning to destroy my place in Orlin's life from the very beginning. After reading those messages between Orlin and Serafina, sleep became a stranger to me. I walked through my house like a ghost, touching furniture I had bought for a home that had once felt full. The silence echoed with memories, Orlin's childhood laughter, his teenage arguments, his whispered apologies after storms of emotion. But now, even his memory felt distant. The next morning, I decided I couldn't rely on screens and words alone. I needed to see my son with my own eyes, hear his voice without interference. So I baked his favorite cornbread, hoping the warmth of it might remind him of who we used to be, and drove to his apartment. When I knocked, he opened the door slowly, almost cautiously, as if he were bracing himself for confrontation. "Mom," he said. Just one word, but everything inside that word had changed. His eyes flicked down to the bag in my hands, then behind him, toward the living room. I followed his gaze and instantly understood why he hesitated. Serafina was sitting on his couch, legs crossed, shoes still on the upholstery, a glass of white wine in her hand, even though it was barely noon. She looked at me with a smile that never touched her eyes. A smile that said, "You are not welcome here." "Oh, Zenoria," she cooed. "You should have called. We were just discussing some things about the wedding budget. In my son's home, while he stood there like a guest, not the owner. I turned to Orlin, but he didn't meet my eyes. Instead, he rubbed the back of his neck, uncomfortable, unsure. "Mom, this really isn't a good time," he whispered. "Not a good time? After weeks of distance? After months of quiet rejection?" I forced a gentle smile, because mothers learn to swallow pain in front of their children. "I just brought something for you," I said, lifting the cornbread. "Thought you might like it." Before Orlin could respond, Serafina rose from the couch. She took a few slow steps toward me, her heels tapping against the floor like warning bells. "We appreciate the gesture," she said, "but Orlin is trying to establish healthier boundaries. He doesn't need these emotional interruptions. Emotional interruptions. That's what I had become." I looked at my son, my only child. His jaw tightened, eyes flickering with conflict. But he didn't defend me. He didn't ask Serafina to stop. He didn't tell her she had crossed a line. He simply said, barely audible, "Maybe we can talk another time, Mama." My heart cracked, not loudly, just enough to let the truth leak in. I was losing him, and someone else was rewriting my role in his life. I left the cornbread on the counter, nodded quietly, and walked out. But as I drove home, a deep cold settled inside me, because this wasn't just distance anymore. It was erasure. And the proof came only days later, when I discovered something hidden that made it clear Serafina didn't just dislike me. She wanted me gone for good. The day after leaving Orlin's apartment, I moved through my home like a woman trying to remember how to breathe. I cleaned surfaces that weren't dirty, rearranged shelves that didn't need touching, all to quiet the ache inside my chest. But no amount of dusting can silence a truth once it settles in your bones. Something was being built against me, piece by silent piece. And I finally saw that truth when I went to my sewing workshop, the one place where my mind usually rested. I had designed a small baby blanket months earlier, thinking I might gift it one day when my son had his first child. Now the folded fabric felt like a relic from a different life. As I opened my work laptop to scroll through my designs, a notification flashed at the corner of the screen. Shared document updated by Serafina Voss. My heart stalled. Why would she be updating anything linked to my account? I clicked, expecting a harmless file, maybe an old invoice or a mistaken share. But instead, a folder opened titled, "Concerns about Zenoria." Inside were multiple documents, all written in Serafina's neat serif font, all dated long before the wedding. I began reading, and each line tightened like a rope around my throat. One file was labeled Behavior Patterns. It claimed I was overly attached, controlling, emotionally unstable. Another was titled Financial Interference. It suggested I depended on Orlin's income, despite the fact that I had never taken a penny from him. A third file was worse, Potential Risks. It implied I might create problems for their marriage, that I might cause emotional harm, that I had difficulty respecting boundaries. Lies, all lies, crafted carefully, professionally, believable to anyone who didn't know me. But the heaviest blow came at the bottom of the last document. A single line written in bold. Recommend limited contact with Zenoria once marriage begins. My breath broke in half. This wasn't about disliking me. This wasn't about misunderstandings or personality clashes. This was a structured effort, planned, documented, and shared to remove me from my own son's life. And worst of all, I saw an earlier version of the file tracked using Google History. Someone else had opened it weeks ago. Orlan. He had read every word. He had seen those accusations. And he hadn't confronted me. He hadn't asked questions. He hadn't defended me. He had believed her. My hands trembled as I closed the laptop. The workshop felt smaller, tighter, suffocating. I sank into my chair, gripping the edge of the table, trying not to collapse. The pain was sharp, but beneath it, something colder awakened. Determination. Because now I knew without doubt. What happened at the wedding wasn't an accident. It was the final step in a plan that had begun long before I ever sensed danger, but I still hadn't seen the cruelest piece, the part of Serafina's plan that didn't just target my relationship with Orlan. It targeted my entire future. After discovering those documents Serafina had created, cold, polished lies typed with confidence, something inside me shifted. I had spent months blaming myself, wondering what I had done wrong, wondering why my son's warmth had cooled into distance. But now the truth was written clearly, line after poisonous line. None of this had been an accident. None of it had been natural. Someone had been preparing my erasure long before I saw the signs. But the worst part came 2 days later. I had an appointment at the community clinic for a routine checkup. I wasn't expecting anything unusual. I had always been healthy, careful, disciplined. But when the nurse looked at my file, her eyebrows knitted together. "You've already submitted a disability support inquiry," she said. I blinked. "No, I haven't." She turned the screen toward me. "Your daughter-in-law submitted it on your behalf. It says you're experiencing cognitive decline." For a moment, the room dropped away. Cognitive decline? Disability support? Submitted for me? I read the file with shaking hands. The report claimed, I struggled with memory lapses. I became confused during conversations. I showed signs of early mental deterioration. I was unable to manage my finances. None of it was true. None. And yet there it was, submitted in Ilara's name, supported by written notes from Serafina, notes that described me as a danger to myself and emotionally unpredictable. A sickening realization swept over me. They weren't just trying to distance me from Orlin. They were trying to build a legal narrative, one that could classify me as unstable, one that would silence me, one that could leave me powerless. As if preparing my removal from his life wasn't enough, they wanted to reshape how the world saw me. I left the clinic in a fog, my steps slow, my breath uneven. The afternoon sun felt too bright, too harsh, like it was exposing the truth I had avoided facing. This was no family feud. This was a coordinated dismantling of my identity. When I reached home, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at my hands that had raised Orlin, fed him, held him through fevers and heartbreaks, hands that had stitched thousands of garments to keep our lives afloat. Now strangers wanted to decide what those hands were capable of. That night I didn't cry. I didn't shatter. I didn't retreat. I made tea, sat in my quiet kitchen, and allowed one truth to settle like a stone in my chest. If they were building a case against me, I needed to start building something of my own. The phone number I had dialed on the wedding night, the one that set a plan in motion, suddenly mattered more than ever. Because this time, I wasn't calling for help. I was calling for justice. But before I moved forward, something happened, something unexpected, something devastating, that changed the course of everything I planned to do next. 2 days after leaving the clinic with that forged report still burning in my memory, I tried to gather myself. I brewed tea, lit a small candle, and told my shaking hands to rest on the table. But no amount of calming rituals could stop the storm rising inside me. People say pain makes you weak. They're wrong. Pain teaches you to pay attention. That night I finally slept. Not deeply, but enough to let my mind drift. But just before dawn, a loud banging shattered the quiet. At first I thought someone was at the door. Then I realized it was coming from inside my house. My heart pounded as I rushed toward the living room. There, standing in the middle of the floor, was Orlin. Not the son I raised, not the boy who used to fall asleep on my lap, but a man with fire in his eyes, fire that someone else had lit. "Mama," he snapped, "why are you trying to make things difficult for me?" I stood frozen, the room tilting slightly. "What are you talking about?" He held up a stack of papers, printed documents I instantly recognized. The false disability report, the psychological notes, the accusations Serafina had crafted, the lies. "Why would you do this?" he demanded. "Why would you make people think I can't take care of you? Why would you—" "Orlin," I whispered, "I didn't write any of that." He laughed, an empty, bitter laugh that didn't belong to him. "Mama, please." They showed me everything. "Ilara told me you've been struggling. Her mother said you're creating problems because you feel threatened by our marriage." Threatened? By a marriage that was built on pushing me aside? I took a shaky step toward him. "Son, please look at me. Do I look confused? Do I sound unstable?" For a brief second, just one, his eyes flickered with doubt. My boy was still in there somewhere, buried under the poison. But then the doubt hardened again, swallowed by the lies he'd been fed. "You need help," he said firmly. "And if you don't get it, I'll have no choice but to limit contact. For everyone's safety. Safety from me." The words cracked through me like thunder. Before I could speak, his phone rang. He glanced down. "Ilara." "Of course," he answered quickly, lowering his voice. "Yeah, I'm here. I'm handling it, as if I were a task, a problem, a burden." When he hung up, he didn't say goodbye. He didn't hug me. He didn't even look back as he walked out the door. The silence he left behind was colder than winter, and that was the moment I understood. This wasn't just manipulation anymore. This was ownership. Control. Complete psychological isolation. And if I didn't act soon, I would lose him forever. But before I could take my next step, something happened. Something so unexpected, so heartbreaking, that it changed the fight entirely. After Orlin stormed out of my house that morning, something inside me simply sank. The door clicked shut behind him, but the echo felt like it traveled through every room, every memory, every year of motherhood I had lived. I stood there for minutes, maybe hours, motionless, holding the papers he had thrown at me. Lies. all of them, yet written with such confidence that even my own son didn't question them. I finally forced myself to sit on the couch. My hands shook, and my heartbeat throbbed in my throat. I told myself to breathe, to stay calm, to not fall apart. But grief is a thief, it doesn't knock. It breaks in. By evening, a headache began pounding at the base of my skull, the kind that feels heavy, like someone pressing a warm stone against the inside of your head. I stood to get water, but my legs felt unsteady. The room tilted slightly, then straightened again. Maybe it was stress, maybe exhaustion, maybe my heart finally showing the cracks it had been hiding. I reached for the counter, gripping it tightly. The glass slipped from my fingers and shattered on the floor. I stared at it, unable to bend, unable to breathe. The pain in my chest spread outward, slow, crawling, terrifying. I tried to whisper, "Not now. Please, not now." But the house was empty. The walls didn't answer. The silence offered no comfort. With trembling fingers, I reached for my phone. I didn't call Orlin. I didn't want another rejection, not while I was this fragile. Instead, I dialed the neighbor, Mrs. Hensley, a woman who had always been kind to me. My voice came out thin. "Could you come over? I'm not feeling right." She rushed over in minutes and gasped when she saw me leaning against the counter. "My lord, Zenoria, you're as pale as a ghost." I tried to smile, but my lips didn't cooperate. She called an ambulance immediately. When the paramedics arrived, I could barely keep my eyes open. One of them placed a cold cloth on my forehead while another checked my pulse. "Ma'am, your blood pressure is dangerously high," he said. "Have you experienced extreme stress recently?" I let out a weak, almost bitter laugh. Stress? It had become the air I breathed. As they lifted me onto the stretcher, I stared at the ceiling above me. The lights blurred into long streaks. My thoughts drifted to Orlan. Not the man who shouted at me this morning, but the boy I used to tuck into bed. Would he care if he knew I was here? Would he even come? The ambulance doors closed. The siren wailed. My heart felt heavier than my body, because deep down I feared the truth. I wasn't just losing my son, I was losing myself. But what happened in that hospital, not from doctors, but from someone I never expected, changed everything. I thought I knew about this battle. The hospital air smelled of antiseptic and tired hope. Machines beeped steadily beside me, each sound a reminder that my body had finally rebelled against months of silent suffering. I lay there watching the ceiling, feeling both present and far away, as if my spirit had stepped outside itself just to rest for a moment. Nurses came and went. A doctor checked my vitals, asked routine questions, and gently reminded me that stress could destroy a body faster than disease. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I had any strength left to pretend. Hours passed, maybe more. I drifted in and out of sleep. My chest still felt heavy, but the cold fear of collapsing alone in my kitchen had slowly faded into a dull ache. Then the door creaked open. At first I assumed it was another nurse, but when I looked up, I froze. It wasn't Orlan. It wasn't Alara. It wasn't anyone I expected. It was Damon, a close friend of mine. From the community center. Someone who had always offered help when I didn't ask for it. He stood in the doorway, holding a small bag of fruit and bottled water. "Zenoria?" he whispered, worry woven into every syllable. I came as soon as I heard. I blinked in confusion. "Heard? From who?" "Your neighbor. She said the ambulance took you away this morning. I tried calling, but your phone must have died." I swallowed hard, grateful and embarrassed all at once. "You didn't have to come all this way." He placed the bag on the bedside table and pulled a chair close. His voice softened. "You've been looking after everyone else your whole life. Someone needs to look after you now." The kindness almost undid me. For a moment I couldn't speak. My throat tightened, and tears threatened to escape, but I forced them back. I had cried enough behind closed doors. I didn't want anyone, especially Damon, to see me broken. He studied my face quietly, then said, "Zen, whatever you're going through, it's too heavy to carry alone. You look like you've been fighting a war by yourself." And for the first time, I didn't deny it. "I'm losing my son," I whispered. Damon didn't rush to fill the silence. He didn't offer comforting lies or empty reassurances. He simply placed his hand gently over mine, grounding me in a way I didn't know I needed. "You're not losing him," he said softly. "Someone else is pulling him away. There's a difference." A difference. One I had felt but never said aloud. Before I could respond, a shadow crossed the frosted glass of the hospital door. A silhouette. Tall. Still. Familiar. My breath caught. because I knew exactly who it was. And when that door finally opened, the truth that walked in changed everything I thought I knew about my own son. The shadow behind the hospital door didn't move. It stood there, rigid, uncertain, as if gathering the courage to enter. Damon noticed it too. He straightened but didn't let go of my hand. The handle turned slowly. My heart thudded in my chest. Then the door opened, and Orlan stepped inside. His eyes weren't angry this time. They weren't cold. They weren't distant. They were confused, heavy, almost frightened. He looked between me and Damon, his jaw tightening, then loosening again. For a moment he didn't speak. He just stood there, breathing unevenly, as though he had been running. Damon quietly rose from his chair. "I'll give you two a moment," he said, placing a reassuring squeeze on my shoulder before walking out. When the door clicked shut, silence filled the room again. Orlan took a step forward. "Mama." His voice cracked a little. "Why didn't you call me?" A bitter smile tugged at my lips. "Would you have come?" The question hung in the air, heavy and painful. He lowered his head. "Alara, she said you were exaggerating. She said you were angry and trying to get attention." There it was again, their version of me. I held his gaze. "Orlan, did you come because you wanted to? Or because they told you to check on me?" He swallowed hard, unable to answer immediately. Slowly, he pulled a folded paper from his pocket and set it on my bedside table. I recognized it instantly. One of the forged documents. "I found this in the car," he said quietly. "Alara asked me to bring it to her mother, but something about it didn't feel right." He sat down, elbows on his knees, rubbing his temples. "Mama, I don't know who to believe anymore. Everyone is telling me different things. I feel like I'm losing myself. For the first time in months, I saw my son, not the manipulated, guarded version of him, but the boy who used to run into my arms after school, confused, searching, torn. I reached out and touched his hand. He didn't pull away. "Listen to me," I whispered. "I am not the woman they're describing in those documents. And deep down, you know that. You were there your whole life. They weren't." His eyes filled with tears, he tried to blink away. "Mama, what if I made a mistake?" he said, voice breaking. "What if I trusted the wrong people?" My throat tightened, but I kept my voice steady. "It's not too late to see the truth, Orlan, but you have to open your eyes. Fully." He leaned back in the chair, exhaling shakily. For the first time, he didn't defend them. He didn't push me away. He didn't shut down. Something inside him was shifting, slowly, painfully, but clearly. But before I could say another word, his phone lit up. "Alara, calling!" Again. He stared at the screen, then at me, torn between two worlds. He didn't answer. Not yet. But the moment he finally chose whether to pick up that call or silence it became the moment that exposed the real puppet master behind everything that happened. The hospital room felt too quiet after Damon left. The faint hum of machines and the slow drip of the IV were the only sounds keeping me anchored to the moment. Orlan stayed seated near the end of the bed, elbows on his knees, staring at his hands as if they held answers he had never searched for. I watched him carefully. There was a softness to him now, something cracked open, something unsure. For the first time in months, he wasn't speaking like someone else's echo. He breathed out slowly. "Mama, I don't know what's real anymore." My voice was barely above a whisper. "Then let's start with something simple. Look at me, really look." He lifted his eyes, tired, confused, but awake. "Do I seem like a woman who has lost her mind?" I asked gently. "Do I look like someone who is dangerous to you?" His lips parted and he shook his head without speaking. A silent apology. But before anything else could be said, the door swung open so suddenly that both of us jumped. Alara walked in first, her expression controlled, but her fingers nervously twisting the strap of her purse. Behind her came Serafina, shoulders stiff, chin high, eyes cold enough to freeze the room. Orlan straightened. "Why are you here?" Serafina pressed forward with authority. "Because you stopped answering your phone. We were worried." Alara stepped closer to him, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "We just want to help you." Orlan didn't lean into her touch this time. I studied both their faces. Nervous, defensive. A little too eager to take control of the conversation. Serafina cleared her throat. "Zenoria, I'm sure this hospital visit is stressful for you." But you must understand the concern we all have about your situation. There it was again. That word. Situation. As if I were a ticking bomb instead of a mother, recovering from a breakdown they helped create. Before I could respond, Orlin spoke. I found the documents. Both women froze. The disability report, he said. The mental health notes. The financial warnings. Everything. Ilara's breath caught. Orlin, No, he said firmly. I checked the edit logs. The creation dates. The signatures. None of them belonged to my mother. You told me she wrote them. Serafina's mask slipped for a single second, a crack so thin most people would have missed it. But I saw it, and so did Orlin. He took a step back from them. You manipulated me. Ilara's eyes filled with panic. We were trying to protect you. From what? He snapped. From my own mother? The silence that followed was heavy. So heavy it felt like the walls were listening. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from the strange sensation of truth finally rising to the surface, after months underwater. Then Serafina said the words that changed everything. Words that revealed her motives were much darker than we imagined, because the truth Serafina finally admitted didn't just expose her lies. The room felt like it had stopped breathing. After months of accusations, lies, and quiet sabotage, everything was finally out in the open. But Serafina still hadn't answered the one question that mattered most. Why? Orlin stood in front of her, shoulders shaking, voice cracking. Why did you do this to my mother? What did she ever do to you? Serafina opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. For the first time since I had met her, she wasn't composed. Her lipstick-perfect smile was gone. Her hands, usually so graceful, trembled slightly at her sides. Ilara stared at her mother, horrified. Mom, please tell him the truth, tell us. Serafina finally stepped back, as if creating distance would give her control again, but her voice came out thinner than usual. You wouldn't understand. Try me, Orlin said. His tone was firm, wounded, but no longer confused. A long silence stretched. Then Serafina's shoulders dropped, and she said the words that changed everything. I didn't dislike your mother because of who she is. I disliked her because of what she represented. My brows furrowed. And what exactly do I represent? She looked at me, really looked, without the walls she usually hid behind. You represent a life I never had, she said quietly. A bond I never knew, a loyalty I never received. The room stilled. She kept going, her voice tight with buried resentment. You have a son who loves you, who built his world around you. You raised him without wealth, without help, without a partner, and yet he adored you. You were the center of his life. Her gaze sharpened. And I couldn't stand it. Ilara covered her mouth. Mom? Serafina didn't stop. You think strong marriages form easily? They don't. They require distance from the past. They require influence from the right people. They require control. And you... She pointed at me with a trembling finger. You were uncontrollable. The truth hit me hard. Not because I was hurt, but because her motive finally made sense. She hadn't been fighting me. She had been fighting the love between a mother and her son. A love she had never known. Orlin's face twisted with disbelief. You tried to destroy my relationship with my mother. Because you were jealous? Not jealous, Serafina snapped, though her voice cracked. Terrified. Terrified my daughter would always come second to your past. To her. I inhaled slowly, letting the truth sink in. All this time, Serafina wasn't protecting her daughter. She was protecting her own insecurities. But Orlin wasn't done. Mama, he said softly, turning to me. You said earlier that you made a plan too. That you were prepared for something. I nodded. Because now, it was my turn. The truth I had been holding back, the one decision I made on the night of the wedding, was finally ready to surface. And it would change everything. The moment Serafina finished speaking, the room grew painfully still. Her confession hung in the air, raw and ugly, but necessary. For months I had wondered why she hated me with such quiet intensity. Now I knew. But it was time for my truth. Orlin turned toward me, his voice soft, almost pleading. Mama, what did you mean when you said you prepared something? What plan? I folded my hands in my lap, gathering my strength. I didn't intend to start a war, I began slowly. But a mother knows when something is being taken from her, when her child is slipping away, and when someone is pulling those strings. Ilara swallowed nervously. What did you do? I reached for the small folder resting beside my hospital bed, the same one Serafina kept glancing at with growing panic. On the night of the wedding, I said, after you threw that soup at me, I knew you weren't just reacting emotionally. You were finishing something you had been building for a long time. Serafina stiffened. Oh, don't look so shocked, I continued. You wrote documents. You crafted stories. You painted me as unstable. That wasn't an accident. Orlin nodded grimly. So what did you do about it? I contacted someone, I said. Someone who already suspected your mother's behavior. Alara's eyes widened. Who? Instead of answering, I opened the folder. Inside were recordings, neatly transcribed pages, and a small flash drive labeled with a date, the date of the wedding. Serafina's breath hitched. Where did you get those? I held the drive gently between my fingers. When you stormed into the kitchen during the reception, shouting about your final step, you didn't know someone else heard you, someone who had seen how you treated the staff, someone who thought it was time people saw your true face. Orlin's brow furrowed. Who heard her? A waiter, I said. He recorded the entire conversation. Your instructions, your threats, your plan, everything. Serafina's face drained of color. You're lying. I'm done lying, I said quietly. That night your cruelty wasn't private. You were loud, angry, careless, and someone pressed record. Orlin grabbed the flash drive with trembling hands. What's on it? Proof, I said. Proof that this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a scheme. Alara looked horrified. Mom, tell me you didn't plan something during the wedding. But Serafina couldn't speak. Her silence was her confession. Orlin stared at the drive, then at his mother-in-law, then at me. A storm of betrayal churned in his eyes, because everything he had believed, everything he had defended, was collapsing. But the truth wasn't finished yet. There was one final recording, one I hadn't played for anyone, the one that revealed the darkest part of Serafina's intent. Because when that last recording plays in, the real reason Serafina targeted me won't just shock Orlin. It will destroy everything she built. Orlin stood frozen, the small flash drive trembling between his fingers. Serafina's face had turned pale, her confidence stripped away like wallpaper coming off in wet strips. Alara hovered behind her mother, shocked and terrified, unable to look away from the truth unfolding in front of her. I watched them quietly. You said there's one more recording, Orlin whispered, not taking his eyes off me. Why didn't you show it earlier? Because, I replied softly, it's the one that hurts the most. Serafina swallowed hard. You're bluffing. I would never say anything that could hurt my own daughter's life. I let out a breath. You didn't say it to Alara. I gestured to the folder. It was a call. A call you made in the bridal suite, moments before the ceremony. You were furious because I had arrived earlier than you expected. You didn't. No, someone had accidentally left their phone recording on the table. Serafina's eyes widened, just a fraction, but enough for everyone to see panic flash through her. Orlin slowly sat down, gripping the armrest. Play it. I didn't need to. The transcript alone would break him. I picked up the page with the date and time stamped clearly at the top. Then I began to read. Yes, she's here. No, she wasn't supposed to show up before the process. I told you, the son is still too attached. If she continues interfering, I will have to push the narrative harder. A little emotional instability, a little pressure. He'll break away. Orlin's entire body jolted. Emotional instability? You mean... Yes, I said gently. She meant me. I continued reading. Once the marriage settles, he won't need her. She'll fade out. I'll make sure she fades out. Serafina took a step forward, breath sharp, voice shaking. Stop reading. But Orlin shook his head firmly. No, continue. My heart tightened as I read the final line, the cruelest one. And if she becomes a problem? Well, sometimes separation is necessary for a successful union, even if it's a painful one. The room shook with silence. Alara collapsed into the chair behind her. Mom, you talked about her like she was disposable. Serafina's voice cracked. I didn't mean it literally. I wanted the marriage to look perfect. I didn't want any outside influence. Outside influence? Orlin stood, rage and disbelief twisting inside him. She's my mother. I was helping. Serafina snapped desperately. I was shaping your future. I was building stability. No, Orlin said, his voice trembling. You were building control. He turned toward me, eyes filled with guilt he could no longer hide. Mama, and all this time, you were fighting alone. I placed a comforting hand on his arm. I only fought because you were worth fighting for. Serafina tried to step forward, but Orlin lifted his hand. No more. The crack in the room deepened, turning into a fault line. But the story wasn't finished, because Serafina wasn't the only one hiding something. There was a final revelation still waiting, and it would decide whether this family shattered completely or rebuilt itself from the ashes, because the final secret comes out. And the truth doesn't just break someone, it saves someone too. After the last recording was read, the room felt like a battlefield that had finally gone quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after truths explode, after illusions burn, after every mask falls to the floor. Serafina stood like a statue, jaw tight, breath uneven, her perfect composure shattered. Alara sat collapsed in a chair, face hidden behind trembling fingers. And Orlan, my son, stood in the center of it all, broken between anger, guilt, and relief. He turned to me with eyes full of apology. "Mama, I should have listened to you. I should have seen what was happening." I touched his cheek gently. "You see it now. That's enough." But the story wasn't over, because there was still one truth I had carried alone. A truth I had kept buried because I feared it would only cause more pain. And now, it needed to come out. I sat up straighter. "There's something all of you need to know. Something I haven't told anyone." Serafina tensed instantly. "What now? Another accusation?" "No," I said calmly. "A warning." Orlan moved closer, concerned. "Mama, what warning?" I took a deep breath. The night of the wedding, when everything became unbearable, when the insults, the pressure, the lies finally crushed me. I didn't only call the waiter. I didn't only gather proof. I paused. I called a counselor. A marriage counselor. Alara's head shot up. "What?" "A very good one," I continued. "Someone who knew about unhealthy family systems. Someone who recognized manipulation the moment I described the situation." Serafina scoffed. "Counselors can't change anything." "They can," I said softly, "when the person being manipulated agrees to speak to them." Orlan froze. You asked a counselor about us?" "No," I corrected. "I asked them about you." His breath caught. "I told them everything. What I saw in you, the fear behind your decisions, the pressure you were under, how torn you were between two worlds, how you weren't allowed to have boundaries without being punished for it." Serafina's face hardened. "You had no right." "I had every right," I said, my voice steady. "Because you weren't just hurting me. You were hurting my son." A long, weighty silence followed. Then I revealed the part I had kept hidden. The counselor told me something that night. Something important. They said Orlan wasn't the unstable one. He wasn't confused. He wasn't weak. I looked directly at Serafina. They said he was being controlled. Alara covered her mouth. "Oh my God." Orlan stared at the floor, shaking. "So, all this time, I wasn't losing my mind?" "No, baby," I said. "You were losing your freedom." Serafina opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. Because the truth she feared the most had finally been named. And the counselor's final advice? That the cycle would only break when the truth came out in front of everyone. I looked around the room, and now it has. But the journey wasn't over. The counselor had given me one last instruction. An instruction I was about to reveal. One that would decide the next chapter of all our lives. Because I revealed the counselor's final instruction. The one that forces everyone in the room to choose what kind of family they want to be. The room felt painfully fragile after my words settled into the air. Orlan stood completely still, as if the ground beneath him was shifting faster than he could understand. Alara silently wiped her eyes, torn between her mother and the man she loved. And Serafina? She looked like someone who had finally lost control of a game she built and ruled for years. I exhaled deeply. "There's one last thing the counselor told me that night," I said quietly. "Something they insisted on." Orlan moved closer. "What was it?" "They told me," I continued, "that if the manipulation was as deep as it felt, then it wouldn't be enough for you to hear the truth from me or from recordings." I looked directly at him. "You would have to speak it yourself." Serafina's eyes widened. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said slowly, "that healing won't happen until you decide who you are without pressure, without threats, without emotional traps." Orlan swallowed hard. "Mama, I don't know who I am right now." "That's exactly the point," I whispered. The counselor said the first step is choosing a boundary. "One boundary." Alara leaned forward. "A boundary like, what kind?" "The kind," I said gently, "that reveals where his heart truly stands." Serafina's voice rose sharply. This is absurd. He doesn't need boundaries. He needs direction. He needs structure. No, I replied. He needs freedom. Serafina's jaw tightened. I gave him stability. You gave him chaos. You call love chaos? I said quietly. For a moment, she didn't answer. Orlan ran a hand through his hair, his voice cracking. What boundary am I supposed to choose? I held his gaze. The counselor's instruction was simple. You must pick who you need space from, so you can finally breathe. The words struck the room like thunder. Serafina stepped forward instantly, fury and fear mixing in her eyes. Don't you dare choose me. Don't forget everything I've done for you. Alara touched her mother's arm. Mom, stop. I will not stop, Serafina snapped. This woman is turning him against us. Those recordings could be fake. This entire emotional show is manipulation. Orlan's voice cut through the chaos. Mom-in-law? Enough. Silence slammed into the room. He took a shaky breath, tears forming in his eyes. All my life I've been trying to make everyone happy, trying to be the perfect son, the perfect husband, the perfect son-in-law, and in doing that, I lost myself. I nodded slowly. Then find yourself again, baby, Alara whispered. Orlan, whatever you choose, I'll respect it. Serafina glared at her daughter. You will not accept a choice that destroys this family. Orlan finally stood tall, broken but clear. I know who I need space from. Everyone froze. His eyes lifted slowly. Painful. Certain. Unavoidable. And then he spoke the name. Time felt slow, heavy, almost painful, as if the entire room was holding its breath. Orlan's eyes were red, filled with the weight of months of confusion, guilt and silent suffering. His voice trembled not with fear, but with clarity he had never allowed himself before. I need space from... He paused, exhaled shakily, and finally said it. Serafina. The name hit the room like a crack of lightning. Alara gasped softly. Serafina staggered a step backward, as if someone had physically struck her. And Orlan pressed his hands against his face, breaking into tears he had been holding in far too long. Serafina recovered quickly, but the panic in her eyes betrayed her calm voice. You don't mean that. You're overwhelmed. You're emotional. She pushed you to say it. No, Orlan said firmly, wiping his face. You pushed me. For months. You controlled my decisions. You manipulated my fears. And I let you. I was guiding you. She snapped. You were breaking me, he replied quietly. For the first time, Serafina had no response. Alara slowly stood up, her voice shaking. Mom, you hurt him. You hurt all of us. And you never admitted it. Serafina turned toward her daughter, desperate. Everything I did was for you. No, Alara said gently. Everything you did was for control. Not love. Those words broke Serafina in a way nothing else had. Her shoulders dropped. Her breathing faltered. She looked suddenly small, stripped of power, stripped of pride, stripped of excuses. Orlan exhaled. I need space from you. Not forever. Maybe not permanently, but enough to see clearly again. Enough to heal. And what about your marriage? Serafina whispered. That's between me and Alara, he replied. Not you. Alara stepped forward, touching her husband's arm. We will take time, real time, without pressure, without manipulation. Just us. I felt a warmth spread through my chest, a quiet relief. Serafina looked at me then, the woman she had spent months trying to erase. For the first time, her eyes weren't hostile. They were tired, cracked, defeated. I didn't know how to be anything other than controlling, she murmured. I didn't know how to build a family without shaping it myself. I met her gaze evenly. Families aren't built by force. They're built by love. Her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. She turned away, walked to the door, paused, and finally left without another word. The silence she left behind was not heavy. It was cleansing. Orlan sank into the chair beside my bed and rested, his head on my shoulder, like he used to when he was a little boy. Mama, I'm so sorry. You don't need to be, I whispered, brushing his hair. You came back to yourself. That's all a mother ever wants. Alara approached me gently. I want to rebuild things with you too. But honestly, this time, I nodded. Healing takes time. But we'll get there. And for the first time in a long time, it felt possible. It felt real. It felt peaceful. It felt like a new beginning. The storm had finally ended. And we survived it. Not perfectly, but truthfully. And sometimes, that's enough.